Okay, so we always begin with, before I get into my thoughts, perhaps there are any questions. Recently, the last several Torah portions.
I'm going to get a kippah.
Okay, the last several Torah portions have been filled with mitzvahs. Many of them extremely practical, very ethical, and if there are any questions on them, was it the guy who walks into an office, an advisor, and he says, I see on your door it says $200 for 3 questions. Is that the case? He says, yes. He says, don't you think that's a little steep? He said, yes. And your third question? All right. So have there been no pressure, but are there any questions from recent Torah portions, or just in general? Any questions maybe we should address before?
I made a statement one time, and I always have people who don't agree with me. Every time Hashem gives us certain rules and regulations, He always say, and this is a Torah for all of you, Ezrach v'Hager.
Okay.
So what that exactly means. And last time, He gave them the obligations also, not just the benefits. They have to live up to the obligation of the people of Israel.
In the last Torah portion?
Yeah. I was shocked. I ran in the shoulder.
Related to what? Like
to whatever rule was given.
Okay.
Because that statement repeats itself many, many times. Mm-hmm. Even with the circumcision, with Abraham, it's already said there.
So I don't know about each specific...
No, not each, but many.
Right, so I don't know about each specific one. Generally speaking, there are 2 types of ger. Ger means a convert. There were 2 types of converts in Israel. One was called a ger toshav, and one was called a ger tzedek.
Yes.
A ger tzedek meant someone who converted to Judaism, as we know it today. The ger toshav was a person who was not a Jew, but living in Israel, committed to the observance of the 7 Noachite commandments. Generally speaking, the person each one was only obligated to that which they committed to. So the ger tzedek, which is a full convert, is obligated in everything. The ger toshav, which was only ger toshav literally means a ger toshav who's dwelling. Toshav means dwelling there. Was only obligated in the 7 Noachite laws, and that was generally those are the rules.
But even with Abraham's story, the same thing happened. He said, if a ger moved with you, he does not have to be circumcised, but his children has to be circumcised, if you recall.
The obligation of circumcision given to Abraham is not the reason we circumcise the Jewish men today.
Okay.
In fact, in the beginning of Parshat Shmini, which was read a month ago, the Torah portion says, "Ubayom Hashmini Yimol Bisar Arla." Sorry, not Shmini, Tazria. Parshat Tazria, which was a week before that, the pasuk clearly says, "On the 8th day he should be circumcised," which is the idea that there was a separate obligation given to the Jews after Sinai. All the mitzvahs that we have, all 613 commandments we have, were given to us as a people. So it could be that Abraham had the obligation to circumcise himself, but that is not the reason we have circumcision. We receive the mitzvah again after the giving of Torah, and that's why that mitzvah is an obligation. We are not obligated in something that was told to the forefathers, which wasn't then repeated to the Jewish people as a nation. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
All right, but so therefore I don't know about each situation. I just know the general rule is that a ger tzedek was obligated, a ger toshav is not obligated.
Does it repeat itself 36 times? Or am I wrong?
I'm sorry?
Does it repeat itself 36 times?
I don't know.
Rabbi Waldman used to say that.
Respect the ger. Don't hurt the ger.
Yeah.
That one 36 times.
says that 36 times in the Torah.
That's
I
what
don't think
Rabbi
so.
Waldman told us. I'm not sure.
Like the orphan,
28.
the widow.
You got 28?
and-
No, 28.
28 times that it says what?
One law.
Which law?
We're not talking about that, we're talking about gear.
Yeah, oh, gear. We can look up gear. You're talking about one law, though, aren't you?
No, I'm surprised. 28 times, that's wonderful.
No, I'm pretty sure it doesn't say that 28 times.
Gear?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, but it doesn't. No, it doesn't say the law of to be kind to the ger 28 times. That doesn't make sense. No.
Where- okay, let me give you an
Don't
example.
The widow,
The law of the sojourner.
I again,
The widow, the
I
orphan.
can't say I know the Torah by heart, but I'm fairly certain that that's not an obligation which is mentioned more than a few times. More than a
Okay,
couple.
I'm sorry to move away from your subject.
No, we didn't get into subject. I specifically encourage to start with questions. By the way, there's an interesting.
And now he's learned his lessons.
Talking about people who've that's not really related. Anyways, okay, never mind.
Okay, another question.
Yes.
When you talked about time, this has come up before. When they talk about the first 6 days when God created, and on the seventh day they came up demarcation of time, like we know time for the Shabbos, for the Sabbath, the seventh day. Were the first 6 days also defined by a time element like we know a day today? Or were those days possibly longer periods of time because the idea of a day hadn't been established yet?
Okay.
So day one, instead of being 24 hours, was it 1,000 years, 100 years, 10 years?
Right. So there are those who actually, there are those who like to reconcile certain beliefs that the world is a lot older versus the Torah belief of it being 5,400 years old. So some say that the logic to that is that not so much before the seventh day, but before the fourth day. I mean, if we are to think today, what defines a period of a day? It's this rise and the setting of the sun.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
before day number 4, there was no sun, right? Day
Correct.
number 4 was when the sun and moon were created. So then the question, the logic is that maybe the first 3 days, considering there was no sun or moon, so then perhaps a day may be, 100 million years.
But then it says,
Others disagree with that. Because then, if that's the case, then Shabbos is not really commemorating creation, because we are commemorating 6 24-hour periods. Furthermore, the Torah describes it as Vayi Erev Vayi Boker Yom Echad. It was night, it was day. It was night and it was morning. It was one day. And Torah is talking to human beings. Why would the Torah tell us one day and we would have then no idea what a day means? The Torah telling us a day to the human being which understands a day to be 24 hours, then the Torah is giving it to us in our language, in which case a day is 24 hours. That being said, there are commentaries which suggest that maybe the first 3 days were a whole different set of time. But that's an interesting point, and it's a discussion which people have. But again, not necessarily before the seventh day, but before the fourth day. Once the sun and moon was there, that became the cycle which we understand today as a day. So day 5 and 6 were certainly 24 hours.
because he says it was good that there was evening and then there was morning on the third day. So it talks about morning and evening, and yet I was wondering if that morning and okay.
I do want to say one point. This will be a segue to inviting everyone to a course which I start next week. And that is just because you mentioned this. At the end of each day, it says God said, God looked, Vihin and Vayar, and it was good, right? God saw what He had created, and it was good. Okay, it says that on Sunday, it says that on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. It doesn't say it on Monday, by the way. And then at the end of all of creation, it says God looked, and He saw, Vihine Tov Me'od. It was very good. So the commentators say, what changed? Till now, everything God sees is good, except for Monday. And the reason is because Monday was division. Dividing the upper waters and lower waters, and division is never good. But the other days are all good. And then at the conclusion of creation, Tov Me'od, it is very good. So what was very good? What difference? What was it that God saw which wasn't just good? Was very good.
Is this after Adam or before Adam?
Before.
Is it before or after?
I thought it was after Adam, but I think you're right. I think
I
it's
believe
before.
it's. We can take a look. I think it may be before, but I think it may be after. But I'm not sure. But Yarvi and you call him Hini Tov Ma'od.
I remember we did
check.
it many times. Yeah. Okay.
Regardless, the point is, what is it? What is Tov Ma'od? What is very good? So
Better
there's
than
several
good.
explanations. One explanation is, what was it that God saw which was very good? The Yetzer Hara,
Uh-oh.
the evil inclination. So everything in creation is good. The evil inclination, that's very good. That's one of the answers given by the sages. So to understand this, I invite everyone to a course which starts next week, which is called Paradigm Shift. It's a 6-week series exploring a mystical view, Kabbalistic, philosophical view on the world and how we see ourselves, how we see each other, how we see the world. I give it Sunday mornings in West Bloomfield, Beis Chabad, and on Thursday evenings at the Federation. So
it's
just throwing
repeat
that
of
out
the repeat Sunday and Thursday.
yeah,
repeats.
you can switch
You do
off.
either one?
Either one works. And I even record it, so theoretically,
Oh.
if you miss a class, you may be able to catch it.
And that's
That's new.
Yeah, relatively new, yeah.
After
But you don't
the-
have same
after the
thing 'cause
creation of
there's a
Adam.
project, there's a PowerPoint which you don't see, so it's not as good, but it's
After the creation of Adam.
after creation of Adam, which makes sense in this.
Makes sense. It makes
which
sense.
makes sense according to this pshat, according to this explanation, must be after because the evil inclination was created for Adam once Adam was there, right? So, right, okay.
There we go. We stop it.
Okay, so that's just some food for thought, and just a curiosity. If you have a hard time sleeping because of that question, give me a call.
We'll give you a call.
To,
Make sure the phone is on.
All right.
I have another
Okay.
question.
Yes,
Going
go
back
ahead.
to the Ger Toshav and Tzedek.
Okay.
Is that delineated in the Torah, those words, or?
No, I don't believe so.
Maybe. I did several times before.
The Torah just
I'd like
says
to
Ger. I
know,
don't
like,
believe it
if
talks
somebody
about.
wants to
I don't think it
went
mentions
right
clearly
over.
Ger Tosher Ger Tzedek.
Where did that come from?
It's a good question. Where's the original words that's used? I mean, it's used in the Talmud and the Mishnah all the time.
Not Ger, but the two.
I understand.
other
Ger
words.
Tosher Ger Tzedek. So I'm saying it's quoted in the Mishnah all the time. The question is if it's quoted in the Tanakh,
Oh.
in the prophets. That I don't know.
Rabbi, the word ger itself means mishu shegar itam.
Yeah, Ger means a.
Ger already means somebody who lives with you.
Yeah.
It comes from the word gar.
We are all called Ger, and Ger Ma'isa and Beretz Mitzrayim. We were all dwellers. Ger means to dwell.
Yes.
To dwell. That's literally the word where the word Ger comes from.
Proselyte, something else.
So are the
It's very
acceptance
hard to
of
translate
both
into English. Very
just
hard.
in Israel, or
No.
No.
Well, in Israel's where they would, push that someone should embrace the 7 Noachide laws. Outside of Israel, we don't have that. We don't push for that. Those who want. We deal with those who want to become Ger Tzedek. We don't necessarily. There is no process of becoming a Ger Toshav outside of Israel. But and nevertheless, it's not
but
as
there-
if we don't encourage 7 Noachide
but there
laws.
is
Absolutely
Israel?
encouraging, and that's
Yes.
especially
Yeah.
what's interesting like this. Speaking about the 7 Noachide laws, is that the Rebbe, Rabbi Shnuer Rebbe, blessed memory, made a very strong emphasis on it. He said for the reason Ram Maimonides says that we are supposed to be a light to the nations. We're supposed to reach out to the nations of the world and encourage them about the 7 Noachide laws. The reason it didn't happen was because for many years we were persecuted. Most countries
bingo.
were busy, protecting ourselves. Forget about going around trying to influence anyone
Bingo.
else.
Yeah.
But now we're back to a situation where we are able to reach out and encourage Jews to be as good Jews, and those Gentiles to follow the 7 Noachide laws. So we can now re-embrace that part of our mission, which Maimonides talks about. Anyways, so yes, but I don't believe it's mentioned anywhere in the Torah. Just uses the word ger, and maybe interestingly, maybe that's the understanding of the word ezrach. Ezrach, which literally means a guest, maybe because he mentioned the Torah. Something that says veger
And there is
ve'ezrach
nochri.
haaretz.
And there is nochri. Means
Right.
completely stranger. Ger, nochri means a stranger.
Right,
Ezrach means citizen.
right.
And then we have leumim. Two leumim in your tummy.
That just means nations.
Yeah, two nations, yes.
Right.
So all the words exist
Yeah.
in the Torah. Yeah.
Okay, but any other questions?
Sorry.
No? Okay, good.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Can we start now, Rabbi?
let's see what we can share from the wisdom of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So,
All right.
here we go. So here's a little bit of trivia. Where is the largest annual gathering of Jews throughout the year? Meron. I didn't even get through the question. The answer was Port Huron. Port Meron.
Yeah, right.
Meron, which is right near Tzfat, is the in which is the burial place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, as well as his son Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Shimon. And on Lag BaOmer, which is the 18th of Iyar, the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, Jews from all across Israel will stream to Meron and spend time there, and go to visit the graves of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. I had
300,000.
And
What?
in Michigan, we go to
300,000.
I think 300,000 is an underestimate.
I've seen 300,000.
Right, so I've heard numbers as large as 600,000.
Wow.
Which, either way. But that's the.
Yeah.
I was there one year. It was an unbelievable experience. I got there late at night and then just stayed up all night and then was there as constant celebration. Actually, when I went, interesting that there was. I had a friend who was celebrating his bar mitzvah back here in Michigan. He was celebrating his bar mitzvah at the age of 53. And I was a close family friend, so I wanted to send. So what I did is I went around with a video camera with a friend of mine, and we just had. See, it's a perfect location because you could get everyone from every stream of Jewish life there, wishing him happy birthday and Mazel Tov. They had no idea who he was. I just told him it's a guy. His name is Akiva. He's having his bar mitzvah. Could you say something to video camera? So you have everyone. One guy is there with his bongo and he says a whole on the spot a rap for Akiva's having a bar mitzvah.
Oh my God.
So it was quite an experience. Lag BaOmer. That was a side point. And but it's one big celebration of all walks. Religious, secular, Ashkenaz, Sfarad, Yemen, everything is everyone congregates there. And like I said,
men?
I'm sorry?
Mostly men?
Yeah, it is mostly, but there are men and women, there are families.
Women are welcome to come.
Yeah, there's both, but it is stronger, I think mostly, but there's both really. Men, women, children. All right, who is this Rav Shimon Bar Yochai? Why is it that the day of his passing is celebrated more than any other passing of a sage? And we know the days that certain people passed away. Moshe Rabbeinu, we know that Moses passed away on the 7th of Adar. We know when many people passed away, and we know a little bit, we maybe commemorate it, we mention something. Shimon Bar Yochai, the day of his passing becomes a festival like no other. So maybe if you understood a little bit about who he was and what he represented, we could also understand why the day of his passing becomes a day of celebration, as opposed to a day of mourning, which would make more sense. All right, what is Rav Shimon Bar Yochai most famously known for? Is for being the author of the Zohar. Now, what does that mean? What is the Zohar? The Zohar is the book of Kabbalah, mysticism, and one can question, why is mysticism necessary? We have the Torah. The Torah tells us what to do. And we live very practical lives. And therefore, why add an element of mysticism, of separation from reality into our, separation? There are other cultures which embrace separation. Some cultures, we spoke about the negative words. So there's there's Buddhism, which talks about silence. Staying quiet for a long period of time. Is that Buddhism? Or people take these pacts that they won't talk for months or even years? Yeah, no, never heard of these things?
No.
Yeah, they have. It's Buddhists do that.
Talk about a Jewish boy that got caught up in one of these places, and the rule was you could say 2 words every 5 years. So they call him, he's there for 5 years, doesn't say a word. They call him in after 5 years, and they say, so you have 2 words, what are you going to say? So he says, bed hard. That is hard. Okay, there's something about fine. Fine, okay. 5 years later, they call him back in, and they say, all right, you've done 5 years of silence. Now, what's your 2 words? He says, food, cold. So they send him out, and a day later, they call him in, and they say, you're dismissed. You have to leave. He says, why? Why do I have to leave? He says, you're here for 10 years, and all you do is complain. So you have these places which are set, which keep us separate from reality. But Torah is not intended to be separate from reality. In fact, the following medrash says that Torah is absolutely all about practical application of life. The Torah says that when God gave Moses the Torah, the medrash says, that when God gave Moses the Torah, the angels said to God, Tana hotcha al hashamayim, leave your splendor here in heaven. So God says, look, the Torah is the holiest of holies. Leave it in heaven with the angels. Well, we study, we understand you, we understand. We're holier than human beings. So God says to Moses, why don't you answer them? Moses said, I'm afraid of them. So God says, don't worry. This is all within this metaphor. The Medrash, God says, hold on to my throne of glory, and then you'll respond to them and you won't be harmed. So Moses did just that. And he responds to the angels. He says, well, let's look in the Torah. The Torah says, let's look at the commandments. The commandment says, respect your honor your father and mother. He says, do you have a father and mother? The Torah says, do not steal. Do you have a temptation to steal? Do you have objects for you to steal? And he went through one after another, pointing out, this is not an angelic Torah. This is a Torah which is filled with practical commandments. So it's not meant for you to be. So God says, so God said to him, Nitzachta, you did well. So the point is that medrash clearly points out the Torah is a practical Torah. So how is mysticism, what place does mysticism have in a practical Torah? So the point I want to share today, in the course of several statements of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, indicating how his mystical approach to Judaism had a very practical outcome in how his Jewish observance was kept. Okay? Let's share a little bit of the history of Shimon Bar Yochai. He himself lived a pretty unique life, and perhaps the story he's most known for is as follows. All right, so Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, I'm sorry that I didn't make photocopies of the notes, so hopefully I'll share the stories clearly, you can remember them. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon were sitting at a table, and they were talking about the Romans who were in power. And Rabbi Yehuda, now there also happened to be another person there, another person named Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda began to say the following. The sage of Yehuda's name, his full name was Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Eli. So Yehuda, the son of Eli, began to say, wow, look how wonderful the actions of this nation, the host nation is, the Romans. They established marketplaces. They built bridges. And they built bathhouses. Well, what a wonderful host. All right. Rabbi Yossi, who was sitting there, was silent. He said nothing. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai responded to Rabbi Yehuda and said, all that they have done, they have only done for selfish reasons. They established marketplaces to place prostitutes there. They established bathhouses for their own luxury and their own indulgence. And they established bridges to collect taxes. Any of you have ever been to New York, you'll understand that. They established bridges to collect taxes.
Roads and
Roads. Well, not like New York. You go over a bridge, you pay $15. In some of the bridges, that's not an exaggeration. Anyway, so this is
Take the subway.
Exactly. This is Rav Shimon's response. Now, the fourth person sitting there seems to be an innocent bystander. What he did is that he somehow he shared that information and got back to the Romans. The Romans said, Rav Yehuda, who spoke highly of us, will be promoted. Rav Yossi, who should have said something but was quiet, he'll be exiled. Rabbi Shimon, who spoke against us, there was a death warrant that he should be killed. What did he do? Rabbi Shimon then ran away. He started hiding. First he hid in the base medrash. Then he realized, first he hid in his house, and then he realized he didn't want to put his wife under the pressure of knowing where he was hiding, and then the Romans catching her and forcing her to say. So then he hid in the base medrash, then he had to leave, and then eventually he went to a cave. And there is where he stayed for 12 years. And actually, eventually he stayed 13 years. Perhaps we'll explain later why I say 12, 13, but let's just say that he stayed there for 13 years, and then he left because there was a miraculous, the description of what he did during those 13 years, he only had, one pair of clothing, so every day, they would get dressed to pray, and then they would take off their clothing, him and his son, did I say him and his son? Shimon and his son Eliezer, and then they would take off their clothing and bury themselves to their necks in sand, and that's how they would spend the day studying buried in the sand, and there was a buxar tree, a carob tree, and a river which was by the wayside of this river, by this cave, and that's how they survived for 13 years until, it says, Elijah came and told them that your lives are not in danger anymore. That's when they came out. Okay, this is the story, perhaps the most famous story of the lifetime of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So now, the question is, what was at the root of the disagreement between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon? Why is it that Rabbi Yehuda loved the Romans, and Rabbi Shimon disliked them? Yehuda, who spoke highly of them, loved them, and Shimon didn't? I mean, the Romans were... The fact is, they both saw the same thing. Was Rabbi Yehuda an optimist and Rabbi Shimon a pessimist? How are we to understand the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon's approach to the attitudes of the Romans? And they said this understanding that it wouldn't get out. So Rabbi Yehuda wasn't saying this for the Romans to glorify him. Rabbi Shimon wasn't saying this for the Romans to get angry. As far as they were concerned, it was a private conversation. What was at the root of their disagreement? Perhaps we can say that within this, we begin to see how Rabbi Shimon's approach to life his mystical approach to life impacted very practical parts of his opinions. The mystical approach to life is based on an understanding that what lies beneath the surface is as important and perhaps more important than what is at the surface. That can be the case with the human being, the soul and the body. That could be the case with the world, the physical reality behind the world. We believe that every physical reality hides within it a certain godly essence which is at its core. Furthermore, it even says that that everything in this world is really a physical reflection of something spiritual. There is a spiritual entity which matches the physical entity of every single being, every single item we come across. But that's a mystical tradition. But the mystics feel that which we don't see is just as important, perhaps more important, than the external reality that we do see. The soul behind the person is just as important as their external. But not only the soul behind the person, if we take that to the next step, the soul behind every action is also important. We can look at the world and say what matters is what I see, or the way a person behaves, and what a person does, and what a person says. Or we can say, no, what is the reason behind their saying this? What is the motivation behind this act? What is the soul of this act? So you have the soul of a human being, and then you have the soul of every act. So here you have a classic example. Rabbi Yehuda says, what is important is the external reality which we see. The external reality is that there are bathhouses, there are bridges, and there are marketplaces. And those are good. And the Romans built them. And therefore we have to be praised, we have to be appreciative to them. Shimon says, no, I don't. Of course I recognize that. I'm not pessimistic. It's not about pessimism or optimism. It's having a mystical view on life. The mystical view on life says, I want to see the soul of this behavior. What is the soul of the behavior of the Romans? Is purely selfish, self-centered, and corrupt. So yes, we may have bathhouses, bridges, and marketplaces, but the soul of those activities were corrupt. They were for rent, they were for taxes, indulgence, prostitution. These were all the wrong reasons. And the soul of that behavior matters. Matters so much so that he felt he had to say it. And because of that, he was punished. He had to run away for 13 years. So we already see the first indication that mysticism has an impact in a certain reality in life, even though here we haven't explained how it has an impact in our observance, but in his opinion, the way he saw the world was different because he viewed things from a deeper approach, from a more mystical approach. So that's the first example where we see this. Let's move on to the next example. And over here we also have a disagreement between the same two people we've been talking about, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. And this is a disagreement in the laws of Shabbat. The laws of Shabbat are such that one is not supposed to plow. One of the 39 what's called root prohibitions of Shabbos is plowing. Not allowed to plow on Shabbos, but you have the laws of Shabbos are complex, and therefore any act which is similar to plowing, creating a trench in the ground, is prohibited because of plowing. The Talmud says like this. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, a person is allowed to drag a bed, a chair, or a bench on the ground on Shabbos, as long as he doesn't intend to make a trench. Rabbi Yehuda says no. The only thing you're allowed to pull across the ground on Shabbos is a wagon with a wheel, because the wheel doesn't cause a trench, it just presses the ground. You have an argument. Shimon says you're allowed to pull the chair. Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to pull the chair. What is the root of this argument? Any suggestions based on what we said? First, the argument is that you're allowed to pull a chair on Shabbos or not, or a bench on Shabbos. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says no. Why? Because the chair may make a trench. Rabbi Shimon says, as long as he doesn't intend to make the trench, it doesn't matter if it makes a trench. It's the same argument as what we said earlier. Rabbi Shimon says Shabbos is about rest, but at the core of the core of Shabbos is an internal rest. As long as the person intends to rest, doesn't intend to do any work, they're observing Shabbos, because Shabbos is not so much about external. There's something very deep about Shabbos. God rested on the Shabbos. We're supposed to emulate God. So resting on Shabbos is not only about my actions. It's about how my actions are reflecting my thoughts. My actions are reflecting my inner being. Shabbos is an inner state of rest, which is expressed externally in certain ways. But it's all about the inner state of rest. Rabbi Yehuda says what's most important is the externality. Is a person doing the prohibited works or not? So therefore, Yehuda says if this chair may make a trench, so then it's prohibited because we judge the action. Rabbi Shimon says no, we judge what's in this person's mind. He never intended to make a trench. All he's trying to do is pull a chair. So internally he's resting. He's doing something which is just the inside. He's resting. He is emulating God in his heart and soul, and therefore the fact that he's pulling a chair, the fact that externally something may happen, doesn't make it prohibited on Shabbos. So here you have an example again where Shimon sees the inside his mystical approach, sees the deeper, the soul of the matter. Rabbi Yehuda views things from a very practical external level. And therefore, pulling, even on Shabbos too, just as by the Romans, Rabbi Shimon was harsh on the Romans because he saw the soul of their actions. When it comes to Shabbos, Rabbi Shimon now is more lenient because he looks at the soul of the action. And the soul of the action, this person never intended to do any work. Rabbi Yehuda sees things externally. Not that Rabbi Yehuda is shallow. That's not what I mean to say. But he says we live in a black and white world. We have to judge things by what we see. If you're judging things by what you see, the Romans did something good. The person who's pulling a chair on Shabbos created a trench. That was the black and white. That's the reality which happened. So here you see, now we just took it a step further, how the mystical view of Rabbi Shimon caused that there is a practical halachic difference when it came to the laws of Shabbos. The first point we made with the Romans just showed how his opinion on life was different. Now he took it a step further. His mystical view, the Kabbalistic view Rav Shimon had, actually changed a very practical law in his opinion. The point which we are leading to is that Rabbi Shimon's view was not mystical in the sense that it's abstract and separate from the reality of Torah, but rather that mystical view on life, that understanding of Torah, not just as a black and white, but seeing the soul of the Torah, soul of one's actions, the soul of one's being, caused him to rule differently in practical situations. But I'm going to share, we got to a late start, but I want to share one, perhaps the most important point at which we see how Rabbi Shimon's view, Shimon, the author of Zohar, his teachings of Zohar, changes perhaps the most important mitzvah of all. And that is, what would, if I were to ask, what's the most important mitzvah of all? What's the answer?
Have no God before me.
Keeping Shabbos, and so you suggested...
Have no God before me.
Have no God before you. These are all very critical mitzvahs. But the Talmud says that a potential convert came to Hillel and said, can you teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot? First he went to Shammai. And Shammai said, this is, you're making a joke out of Torah, you can kindly exit the room. Shammai was a sage, a scholar, right? So Shammai left. So the man left. So then he came to Hillel. Hillel was known not only for his brilliance, but also for his extreme kindness and patience. So someone came in, so the convert says, someone who's not convert, the potential, thinking of converting, he says, can you teach me all of Torah while I stand on one foot? Hillel said, sure. He said, Madasani lach lechavrach lo sabit. He says, the Torah is that which you don't like, don't do to your fellow. In other words, love your fellow as yourself. And then he said, the rest of Torah is an explanation on that. Now go learn the explanation. And this person eventually converted, and he gave tribute to Hillel's patience and kindness to leading to that. But if there's one mitzvah, it's the mitzvah ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your fellow as yourself.
That's in this week's parsha.
We did.
Parshas Kedoshim.
Kedoshim, yes.
Kedoshim. A couple last week now. 1918.
Who said 1980?
Rabbi did.
There you go. My Maritza
That was
Parsha.
very nice. You said that?
I said it after she said it,
Oh.
but that's how. I do remember there was 18. 18 is Kai. So now this is a very powerful mitzvah. It's also very hard to understand. It's kind of strange. Love your fellow like you love yourself. You ever open up a birthday card or any card and it says, "I love you like I like myself"? Never seen that. It's kind of strange. It also comes across as a little bit self-absorbed. I love myself so much, and I like you just like that. And it's a strange saying. It is a strange saying. Love your fellows, love yourself. What's interesting is there's an obligation to love God, but the obligation to love God doesn't say love God as you love yourself. We say it in the Shema: love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. And yet the fellow Jews, love your fellow as yourself. So this is a very strange mitzvah. To tell someone you should love your fellow, you should be kind, that all makes sense. Love your fellow, be kind, be nice. That's fine. But love as you love yourself is just a strange wording. It's also very difficult to understand and very difficult to actually live that way. It's not love one person. It's love your fellow means everyone. Millions of people like you love yourself.
Treat everybody as you want to be treated.
How can you do that? And here is where perhaps you see most importantly how Rabbi Shimon's view, which is the mystical view of Torah, is the only way to truly understand that mitzvah. The only way to appreciate this obligation is if one looks at it through the lens of the Zohar, the lens of Kabbalah. Otherwise, you have to give some sort of excuse to explain it, but it's not an actual explanation. And those who don't usually use Kabbalah do use others. It doesn't literally mean love like yourself. It means love the way you like to be treated. But the only way to translate these words literally, like them like you love yourself, is based on the teachings of Kabbalah. And this is expressed in the Tanya, which is the book of Shnuer Zalman of Liadi, who says like this. He says the truth is that we have a belief that there is really one collective soul. There is one Jewish soul. There's one soul. Every being has a soul. But there is the Jewish people have one collective soul. And really, it's all one being. The bodies separate each of us from one another. You see, the truth is that the soul is a part of God, so then how can there be many souls? In that sense, really, all of humanity is one. If all of us have a soul, and the soul is godly, how can God be separated into billions of little pieces? We know there's only one God. So we therefore recognize there is really just one soul. It's one soul, one entity, which is separated into different bodies. Almost like we see our own body, despite the fact there are different parts of my body, I know that this finger and this finger are both one entity. There's one soul for both fingers. So now, if we just extend that a little bit, why can't these two fingers and someone else's two fingers also be part of one entity? Why? Because they're not connected? I mean, that's only a technicality. Now, the Kabbalah says, this is obviously based on a mystical approach, that really there is one soul, there's one godly being, godly soul which came into the world, and then that was now separated into many different beings. And when the Torah says, love your fellow like you love yourself, the Torah is telling you, love your fellow because they are an extension of yourself. They are an extension of you. And therefore the key to loving them is, the key, here's an interesting point. Usually we would think the key to thinking as yourself would be to love them. If you love them, then you love them as yourself. The opposite is true. The key to loving them is seeing them as an extension of yourself. If you see them as an extension of yourself, then you can love them. But if you see them as a separate entity from you, it is almost impossible to love everyone as a separate entity of you as much as you love yourself. So the Torah is not saying love others as much as you love yourself. The Torah is saying love yourself, but recognize that others are part of yourself, are an extension of yourself. So really, by loving yourself, you should be loving everyone, because it is one entity, separated by bodies. Okay? So you have to see past the bodies, you have to see the soul, which requires a view, not an external view, but a deeper view, a mystical view, which Rabbi Shimon said. So Rabbi Shimon's teachings provide us the ability to fulfill the most important mitzvah in its truest sense. So we started by asking, why do we need Kabbalah? Why do we need the mysticism if it's a practical Torah? And we concluded by recognizing that the most important mitzvah in all of Torah can only be observed with a dose of mysticism, with seeing a deeper reality behind the external reality. You see, because if we see things externally, we are all very separate beings, living separate lives, in which case it is almost literally impossible to love someone else, especially many other people, as much as one loves themselves. Now this idea, we find, is expressed in several statements of Rabbi Shimon. One statement he said is like this. He says, Amar Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai says, Minayin ata Omer, how do we know that even if one person was absent by the giving of Torah, the Torah would not have been given? Because God says, Le'eni kol ha'am, that everyone had to see it. Now, Rosh Shimon is saying this statement. We have a belief that aside from the bodies which were there, people alive were there, all the souls, the future souls of the Jewish people were also at Sinai. And Rosh Shimon Bar Yochai is saying that if one person wasn't there, the Torah would not have been given. Why not? Why not? I mean, you have several million people there. Why is it important that one soul shouldn't be there? So, if you see the Jewish people at the time as a group of 3 million people, so then having 3 million or having 3 million and one people wouldn't make that much of a difference. But if it's one entity, so if there is one person missing, it's an incomplete entity. And there had to be, God wanted to give the Torah to the entire people, to that entire soul. So again, if it's just separate entities all embracing one religion, so then one person missing wouldn't change anything. That person, it's a loss for that person. But if it's one entity, that person not being there's a loss for everyone. Everyone is incomplete. Everyone is incomplete, and therefore the Torah can't be given to an incomplete entity. God wants to give the Torah to a complete entity. That's one saying, he says. Another saying, which is a metaphor which you may have heard, but he says it clearly in the Talmud, it's like this. He says, Tani, this is from the Medrash. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said the following. Mashal, there's a parable which can be given lebnei Adam, to people, shahayu yoshvim besfina, that were sitting in a boat. So you have people sitting in a boat, and each one has his own little compartment. One person decided he's going to drill a hole. All right? So he drills a hole. He takes his mikadech, which is a chisel, and he starts chiseling a hole. He starts digging a hole in the floor of the boat into the water. So his friends say, so what are you doing? He says, it's none of your business. It's my room. It's not your room, my room. I can do whatever I want in my room. I'm digging specifically under my room. Amrulai, so they responded, no, it may seem like your room, but the water which comes up in your room is going to sink the entire boat. And Shimon Bar Yochai says that, which you may have heard this metaphor before, but he's basically saying that the mistake which one person makes in his little room, in his little portion of life, impacts and could sink everyone. The same is true with the positive. It's a nice saying. But Rav Shimon wasn't just saying it's a nice example. He was saying this with a true understanding that this is true. That the mistake of one person impacts everyone. Why? Because one person is connected to everyone.
That's what we learn. Kol Israel Arvim Zilazeh. That will be it.
Right. All the Jewish people are guarantors responsible for one another. But this is understanding that on a deeper level. Because you can hear the term, I'm responsible for you, you're responsible for me. It doesn't necessarily mean oneness. He's saying, yes, we're responsible because your mistake is in effect my mistake. Your good deed is, by extension, a good deed for me too. The achievement of this hand becomes the achievement of this hand as well. And that's the understanding of Shimon Bar Yochai. And that's why, now, just to conclude by answering the original question. So why is it that understanding this, so we understand how much that impacts everything. But understanding this, we can now understand also why is it that we celebrate his passing. And on its most basic reasons, because he asked his students to do so. He told his students that the day I pass away should become a day of celebration. But why did he say that? So again, it goes back to the same discussion. Death, the tragedy in death, is really an external understanding, the way we see the world externally. There's an external reality that there was a person here we loved and cared for. Now they're not here. And that pain is very real. God forbid to make light of that. In Rav Shimon Bar Yochai's eyes, though, that's the external truth. The internal truth, especially for someone as holy as he was, the moment of death was the moment that he was going to connect to God, going to become, especially he who strove all his life to see the truth of God everywhere. He felt that death will be the seeing that all that which he strove to teach throughout all his life. He'll now sense that oneness with God, which he couldn't. None of us can really sense it while we are alive and contained in bodies. He said it will be the true release of my soul, which all my life has been yearning to have a true vision and knowledge of God, and now I'll get that. And that is the true essence of the death, especially the death of a tzaddik, of a righteous person. Others, we do believe in a day of judgment, and there's that idea of cleansing process. So perhaps for others, it's not, for anyone, the moment, really, we believe death is really a time where the soul reaches a place of truth, but perhaps the truth includes a cleansing process. Someone like Shimon Bar Yochai, certainly not. The purity of a tzaddik like that. So he recognized that the truth, the internal truth, was that the day of his passing was a day of tremendous holiness for him, and truly a wonderful day for him. But you have to live a life of seeing the internal truth to realize that. Most of us don't, and therefore most of us, understandably, the passing of someone is looked at as a tragedy. But the internal truth there is that the soul now is ascending to a place of truth. And he who lived all of his life emphasizing the internal truth said the internal truth of the day I pass is a celebration. Therefore I'm going to celebrate that day every single year. So that's why specifically him, his yahrzeit is a day of celebration. That answers that question. So we'll stop here. This is, again, a week and a half.
I read that he had 4 students left, and the 4 students, though, in his last day of his life, he taught them the Zohar. And I thought, because then I read somebody said, how could he teach the whole Zohar in one day? Again, it goes back to what's a day. But if he said the essence,
I'm curious if you're combining 2 stories. One story was Rabbi Akiva, who lost all of his students except for 5.
It's a kiva.
Wait, except for 5? One of which was this Rabbi Shimon.
Yeah, it's a kiva.
Then a second story is that the day Rabbi Shimon passed away, he shared the deepest secrets of the Zohar to his students. So that second part is true. So Rabbi Shimon, the day was passing, and as the day went on, he got deeper and deeper, sharing the deeper secrets, the more intimate truths of the Zohar, until he passed away literally as the sun was going down. At the last moment, he says he shared, what was the word? I think the Zohar says which word. I think his soul departed upon saying the word. Was it Chaim, which means life, or was it Tahor, a very powerful word, and that was when the soul departed. So this gives a bit of an explanation as to why the life of Rabbi Shimon is such a powerful life and how it impacts all of us, and it should impact all of us, not on a mystical level, on a practical level. The way we behave.
I found a continuation to the Ve'ahavta L'Recha Kamocha, same chapter, 34. Here, I'll let you read it.
Ani Hashem, no? What was the next word?
No, it says, you read it. You have to love the ger just like yourself.
Right.
Isn't it nice?
Mm-hmm. True.
It's a continuation of 1918.
Exactly.
Linda, it says you have to love the ger just
Because
like
you were
yourself.
Gerim, because you were all converts in the
That's
land
right.
of Egypt.
Well,
Very nice.
no,
Super
because in
Chumash.
Israel somebody made a statement and I was bothered by a statement and I found the
Once
answer.
you're a convert, you're no longer a convert.
Pardon me?
You're just a Jew. You're not a
I
Ger
didn't say
anymore.
convert, I said ger.
So when you speak about Ger, you're talking about non-Jewish people,
Yeah.
right? You're
Or,
not
or righteous, of course.
outside of
Yeah.
the Jewish people they're talking about.
Yeah.
And many people think Ger is a convert to Judaism.
That's one of the explanations. Every time you see the word ger in English has different word, you know.
That's why the Talmud it clarifies, Ger Tzedek, Ger Toshav.
Yeah, I love that. Ger Toshav, Ger Tzedek, yeah, I love that.
When you look at the Tanakh, like in there, it says proselyte.
So what's
the
the
Hebrew word?
What's the Hebrew word for proselyte?
Ger.
You know what I mean?
It's
you
a
know,
broad term over
Are
here.
you going to differentiate? Well, I know how you want to differentiate from tzaddik and
It's a tough
the
word,
other
it's
one.
very hard.
Ger
I don't
Tzedek,
know.
Ger Toshav.
I mean,
Yeah.
Was Yehuda
That's
one
how
of
they
the
wanna
people that
separate.
led the revolt against the
Right.
Romans? Wasn't it Yehuda?
No, that was Bar Kochba.
So does
What
all
was
of
his
this
first name?
apply?
I forget
Shimon.
it. Shimon Bar Kochba? Yeah, he do
His
it.
original name was Shimon Bar Koziba.
Bar Koziba.
Oh, that's
They called him Bar Kochva because Kochav means. What does Kochav mean?
Kochab?
Yeah, what's a Kochav?
A
star.
Yes.
So he was a star, so they changed to they called him Bar Kochva, but that wasn't his real name, because he was they saw him as the star. So they called him Bar
Koziba?
Kochba. His real name was Koziba.
Thank you.
Bar Koziba, the son of Koziba. Shimon
Thank
Bar
you.
Koziba.
Thank you.
All right. So again, if anyone would like, starting a new course of learning next week. Welcome to join us. And I know I've mentioned to several of you individually. In 2 weeks, 2 weeks from tonight, we have a very special event in the Sheraton of Novi. That is our annual shul dinner honoring my parents for 40 years of work, and the speaker is a fascinating speaker. His name is Rabbi Benjamin Blech. One of the areas where he's an expert in is the Sistine Chapel. He speaks extensively
him.
about
That's the one we saw.
We met
He
him.
was good.
Yeah, so
He
he's the
was
speaker. He's
really
coming to
good.
speak.
We've
Yeah?
seen him
And if you'd like to come, please let me know. We can.
She bought his book.
I'd love.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
That was fascinating.
So he's the one he'll be coming to speak for us.
I said to him, God, why is this guy so familiar to me? That's why. Yeah, he was good.
Also in Yiddish, the word blech is actually a metal. We have a Shabbos blech.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So that's. All right. Well, pleasure coming here again. Especially there's no snow on the ground.
Oh, I have a question.
Okay.
So, where do you even start? Does what you said about loving your neighbor as yourself apply to the non-Jew?
Well, he just pointed out the Torah. The words "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha" is referring to a fellow Jew, but you see, he points out that it says "V'ahavta sager," like the convert as well.
Verse 34, same chapter.
There is an addition. I would
But if
say
he
the
isn't a
obligation
convert.
to a fellow Jew
Pardon me?
is
But if he isn't a
Is-
it is somewhat stronger.
What's that?
It is it is a little stronger. This takes precedent in some ways, halachically. But the
Right.
logic we
That's what
gave
I've
really applies to a certain degree to all humanity. These like different levels, almost like within a family. You have the closest relatives, and then more this, and all of humanity is that way as well. Humanity is like various layers of closeness, but it is one family, really all of humanity.
You send out the email again about that class on Sunday. I know I saw it one time.
Right. I sent out an email
Sent out
today titled 9.5 Questions About You. So that was on
And
this
there
topic.
was,
Go up there, then,
No, Rabbi,
Jews are
bottom
similar.
line, the whole world is one soul. We're not differentiating between Jews and non-Jews.
No, there is a difference.
Oh,
The
yeah.
truth is there is, but there is also that oneness that exists for all mankind. There is a oneness. There is a oneness for all mankind. There's a closer oneness for the Jewish nation, that Jewish stuff. That's why I gave the example of a family in which it's all related, but there may be the closer relatives and the further relatives. So there is that dynamic within the society.